Hey, Em.
Hi, Phil. You look fantastic.
You
I'm
look
loving this.
incredible.
I'm loving this shirt, this Hawaiian themed shirt.
Yeah, I just went to Vegas this past weekend and I'm just still kind of feeling it, in your neck of the woods a little bit.
Exactly.
And, I just thought, let's just keep it going.
Well, I love it. I'm so happy to
You
be
look
here with you, Phil.
incredible.
Thank you. Well, this is a little tie-dye to help you with your Western expansion, I suppose is what you're doing.
Yes. Perfect.
So thank you so much for agreeing to do this. This is so exciting.
Thank you.
Welcome to everyone who's watching and listening. For those of you who are familiar with Phil's work and his being, you know that he is just a truly independent voice and a lovely man and an incredible writer. And I'm so honored to be a part of this stage of his, to be part of the stage of this book.
And you've seen all the stages.
I have the great honor and the great pleasure of sort of copy editing his books throughout all of their different iterations. And it's such a joy. It's kind of like watching someone grow up. It's like seeing all of the different stages of maturation and evolution. And it's so exciting. And now we're holding it.
I know. I can't believe it.
So what I'm going to do is, just because I could blither on about how great I think it is, but there are people who do it better than me. So I'm going to read one of the, in just the first page in the book, the advanced praise from Tim Murphy, who I know you'll give us a little bit of context about who Tim Murphy is in your life. But this is a wonderful description of the book. So he writes, scathingly funny, downright nasty, unnervingly haunting, and ultimately heartbreaking. The stories in Better Davis and Other Stories take a very specific moment in American culture, the late 70s and early mid 80s, and imagine the inner worlds of true life celebrities, artists, gay playboys, and their good time gal pals, as AIDS shadowed down and then decimated a vibrant and decadent generation. Keenly aware of his characters' feelings and frailties, as well as their vulnerability and humanity, Philip Dean Walker writes as if Andrew Holleran had ever turned his shrewd leads on the likes of Elizabeth Taylor, Rock Hudson, and Paul Lindy, revealing the messy and tender hearts of large and small American icons who are already half forgotten. I love that.
I know. I was like overwhelmed when I read that first time.
I bet.
Yeah, Tim is a friend, a brilliant writer. He wrote, we've talked about it, but he wrote an 80s AIDS novel himself called Christodora, which is just incredible. Everybody should go out and get it. And he wrote that wonderful blurb for me and is a big fan of Better Davis. Yeah.
Well, it's just a great introduction. I'm just going to dive in. I also want to ask the viewing public, that people who are watching, to write questions as we will turn to your questions, but please write them as they come up. Don't wait till the end, because this conversation, Phil and I can talk all night long, but it's better if you guys give us your questions. So please, as things come up, please ask questions or just say things, or if you're a fan of the book and you want Phil to read a specific part of it. I will say, having watched and listened to him read, he is a fantastic reader. So if there are parts of the book that you specifically love or want to hear him read, please suggest that, because I would love that. But I just want to start off because it's such a unique time to publish a book. So I'd love for you to talk about the kind of phenomenon of writing during a pandemic. I know you didn't write the whole book during a pandemic, but I'd love to know if it was a strange and reflective time, if it was a time for sustained contemplation. Can you talk us through sort of
Well, it's funny when you just framed it that way. I was thinking in the beginning days of the pandemic, you would think that all of a sudden you had all this free time, so why not just read everything you've ever wanted to read? But I actually felt like I couldn't read in the beginning. And it was hard to read. It was hard to kind of concentrate on something, except that's why mindless kind of reality television was like the way to go. Like I couldn't, or just anything. So I feel like you just reminded me of the fact that I found it hard to read in the beginning of the pandemic, which is interesting to kind of remember. But then I got over it, obviously. But so finishing it during the pandemic was just so unexpectedly just like relevant to everything that I was writing in the book. I mean, it just kind of, writing about an epidemic during a pandemic, there were a lot of similarities I saw that I'd only ever heard about that were happening in the early days of AIDS. I mean, and I'm just thinking of the early days of the pandemic where there was new information coming out every day. And it was just, there was just, no one knew what was going on. And I think that sense of, especially in those really, really early days of AIDS, like the first couple of months, I mean, it was that kind of slow motion, like the number of deaths just starts ticking up. And it's like, you're slowly watching this kind of like, it's almost like a horror film in some way. It's just slowly around the corner. And I felt like that feeling of it just hovering around the corner of some of these stories is similar. It's almost like the killer, it's like Michael Myers, it's Halloween season. So let's keep it on point.
Totally.
Let's keep it on point. I can't wait to see the new Halloween. But in some ways in this story or in this book, AIDS as the monster is just sort of hovering around the surface of the story. Sometimes it's dealt with more directly and more explicitly, but I think and some of them it's just like a whisper of the ghost. It's sort of there in the background, but you're not really. It's just there. It's there.
Interesting,
yeah. And we as a modern day reader have that kind of built into our lens in reading these stories. But sometimes the people don't know, the characters themselves aren't quite sure what's going on. So we're kind of more informed than the characters in a lot of these instances, which is hard to write, because you can't be a narrator who knows everything. You can't just kind of in parentheses, well, they had no idea what was coming. About it's just the narrative distance was definitely part of the writing of these particular stories. I think that had to be reckoned with,
of course. And also it's this legacy of America, of our history that is so complicated and so painful that you can't just dive in and like blow it up. It has to be dealt with very carefully. And well, that leads me to another question, which I just would love for you to talk about. For those of you listening who have read the book and have read Danceteria, I always have to make sure I pronounce that right. Cafeteria, Danceteria, right?
Yeah.
Did I do it right? Yes. I always want to say Danceteria.
Oh, right.
Because I speak Spanish, so I want.
Yeah. That's how I was saying it at first too.
No. So in these two books, you go about reimagining a time and an emotional and a physical and spatial time and the characters that lived it, but you infuse sort of an imagined storyline into these people. And what I like to call it is historical, it's like historical nonfiction, but it's historical refiction.
Yes.
You're kind of reimagining the storylines of people who have lived through this time.
That is coined by Emily Voorhees, by the way.
Coined by moi. Thank you very much.
Historical refiction.
And we're done. And we're done with this conversation.
It's documented.
Exactly. But I feel like just describing how you described the sort of the care you had to approach this time with, that narrative lens that you gave it was so appropriate. And I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about like how you were drawn to this genre and how you came about, how you got into it in some way.
Yeah, I mean, I happened upon it very, very randomly. If you want to know the honest truth, I do. Yeah. Okay. I had a story due I was in grad school for, creative writing, and I had a story due the next day, and I hadn't started it, and it was like 11 p.m. And there was a prompt, and it was something like, it was very general. It was, the story is sort of happening in the present tense, but there's a sort of dip into the past. And like, you know, the dip into the past, I think, is sort of the first little germ of the book in a way. So I had just watched a documentary on Keith Haring, and there was this video of his 26th birthday party, which was actually it was held at the Paradise Garage. It was not at Danceteria. And Madonna was performing, and I just was like, what if I wrote a story where the characters were just famous people, you know, or like real people, and just kind of see what that looks like? Because I'd never done anything like that. And I just dashed off a very small, short story. It's the shortest story, I think, in both of the books, maybe. And what was great was that Madonna and Keith Haring, like I did a little research, and Madonna and Keith Haring had both worked at Danceteria when they were like nobodies. Like he was a bar back and she was like a, you know, coat check girl. And so having this scene of them I moved the real, see that this is the first instance of me kind of skewing the facts. Like it happened at the Paradise Garage, but I moved it to Danceteria because I loved the idea of these two freshly famous icons kind of in their old stomping grounds when they were, you know, total nobodies. And then so I have a little scene in the story that is the present day party, where they kind of goes back to where they're like having a cigarette on their break, you know. And it's just like, I feel like it's sort of, that story is sort of set up in a way, because I didn't really know what I was doing. That was just a total one-off, you know. But I think that story kind of set up the sort of anti-nostalgia of the stories, because they're not nostalgic. They're more, and this is actually my professor said this about both books, that it sort of resists nostalgia, and I guess it does. But I think that's that first story, which is the title story at Danceteria, which I did not come up with. Sometimes I'm really bad with titles. But that I feel like that did set up a lot of the writing of the rest of the book, and how the AIDS kind of ghost comes into that story, set up that pattern that I would repeat later of dealing with a heavy subject, but kind of from a different angle, or from different banked angles. I don't know.
I love that. I mean, I think that's kind of in some ways what that sort of banked angle idea is, something in some ways what literature and art does for us, is gives us a different angle through which to understand some things that are painfully horrible or too extraordinary for us to really swallow. So it's too
hard to take head on.
Right. Or even in some way, maybe like in the flip side, maybe too much to take on. But yes, in the case of, you know, what you're grappling with in your work, yes, just too much. I mean, it's too.
Yeah.
And so you offer your characters an opportunity to kind of do it for you, for us.
Yes.
Through their work and through their life, which you've reimagined, which I think is. So I want to talk a lot. I want to talk about the research that you do, but first I would like an opportunity for the listeners to hear you read, because this is a real treat. And I also just want to say that we had chosen one story, but we're going to change stories, and we're going to start with the beginning of the book, because Stephanie from Malaprop's bookstore really is a fan of this story. So I'd love for you to maybe, I don't know where you want to start in this. We didn't talk about this, but
I think maybe at the beginning.
Okay, great.
I'll read a little bit. This is for Stephanie. Thank you, Stephanie, for having us. And actually, I wanted to say also about Malaprops. Thank you. So my dad's family is from Johnson City, Tennessee, which is just an hour or so away from Asheville. And Asheville has always been a big part of my life. We used to go to Biltmore, you know, every Christmas, and my Aunt Amy lives there. I hope she's watching. Love you, Amy. So anyway, thank you, Malaprops, for having me and Emily for tonight. So I am going to read from the first story in the book. I'll just read a little bit. It's called Very Special Episode. Jim watched the television in the waiting room of Dr. Mallory's office while he waited for his test results. Something was playing on a loop on the screen. It was a cheaply shot dramatization of a patient going into a doctor's office to receive his results. It had the feel and quality of one of those local commercials for car dealerships or wall-to-wall carpeting, the ones shoehorned into daytime broadcasts with bad audio and production value. To Jim, the video seemed meant to prepare patients watching it for what to expect when they got their own results. He almost couldn't believe it, but the man who was playing the patient in the video had once been in an acting class with Jim when he first moved to LA in 1977. It had only been 8 years ago, but it felt almost like an entirely different era. The homosexual Mesozoic era, when he was still a complete nobody and sometimes paid for acting classes instead of food. The pre-plague years, those halcyon days when the worst thing that could happen to him was being stood up on a date or getting crabs or having a hot guy bust too soon at Flex on a Friday night. Such little tragedies back then. Soon after the end of that acting class, Jim had landed a part in a local production of Godspell at Hollywood Presbyterian. One night, his performance caught the attention of a casting agent who was in the audience. The next day, the agent recommended him to a director to play a character named Monroe Ficus on an episode of a new ABC sitcom called Too Close for Comfort. He was almost positive that the name of the actor, the one who was playing the patient in his doctor's waiting room video, was Travis. He could remember Travis playing Brick in a cat on a hot tin roof scene in that same acting class opposite a friend of Jim's named Lana, who played Maggie the cat. Travis was the kind of man one might have assumed was straight back then. But all the signs had been there for Jim to see that Travis was probably gay, or at the very least bisexual. He was muscular without looking like Rambo. He had the clone mustache and that little tuft of black chest hair popping out of his Lacoste shirts, the ones that hugged his biceps so perfectly you'd have thought the sleeves had rubber bands built into them. He was spectacularly butch in almost every way that Jim was not. And the way he had played Brick had been so alluring too, so seductive. It felt like he was taunting Jim at every moment with his huge dick in those silk pajama bottoms he wore in the scene. Like he might just whip it out at any moment. How do you know Travis isn't straight? I mean, have you fucked him? Lana asked one day after their class. Lana always proudly introduced herself to straight men as the world's thinnest fag hag. No, but I can usually tell, Jim said. Well, I dare you to sleep with him then, Lana challenged him. I dare you to, said Jim, laughing. Honestly, I don't think it would be that hard for either of us to get him to bed. He comes across as very all-purpose, if you know what I mean. No, I don't actually, said Lana. Well, then you're not a very good fag hag, Lana. See, I know a guy in his early 30s who's as rugged and manly as they come, has a wife and 2 kids, and is like a total pussy hound. But he's always had sex with men too. From his teenage years all the way to the present day, Jim said. And he's a total bottom who loves to be rimmed and fucked. And I assume you've done the rimming and fucking? Asked Lana. Oh, well, I would never tell, Jim smiled. But he did eventually tell Lana that of course he had rimmed and fucked the married man. Countless times. Vincent, no last name ever provided. in the parking lot of a hardware store, in Van Nuys, in Vincent's car, with Jim's head bumping into a toddler's car seat, at Flex one night when Vincent had mysteriously shown up, latching himself onto Jim as if Jim were a tour guide, ushering him through the bathhouse underworld. Even in Vincent's own house once, when his wife and kids were visiting his mother-in-law. How funny it was to see Travis again after all these years. And here, of all places, in this hideous waiting room, the absolute last place on earth Jim wanted to be. Leave it there.
Ah, we are all clapping.
Thank you.
I just love watching you read, Phil. It's so great.
Thank you.
So that's a great place to start for our next line of questioning. And actually, Aaron Hamburger, what a great name. I don't know if that's a
Yes, I know Aaron.
Oh,
Hi,
good.
Aaron.
Is that his real name?
That is his real name, yes.
Oh my God, I love it.
He's a wonderful writer.
Oh, I love it. I'm partial to cheeseburgers, but oh my God, that was the worst joke. Did I say that? I'm so sorry, Aaron and Phil. But I do want to, okay, so I want to read Aaron's question because it's similar to the one I was about to ask, which he says, Philip, congrats on the book, which I love. Can you talk about some of the research you did for it? And I would like to just expound on that question and ask. So I know you do so much research for this, for all of your writing. And I would just like to sort of ask, how much when you do this research, how much do you rely on like the famous quality of who you're researching, who you want to write about, that we all know in order to create your renditions of these characters?
Yeah, that's the big trick of the, that's it right there. I do so much of that research because I don't feel like I can write the story about these people until I find that person behind the famous qualities that we all know so well, which I want there too. I mean, that's a big part of who they are as well, but it's finding this sort of the real character. And I call them characters because I do, and that's not a pejorative, you know, I call them that because I respect my characters so much, and I don't think they're finished until they're fully alive and fully breathing on the page. So I treat these, I never want to rely on the famous tint that we have about them, because that's just cheap and easy. You have to find the real person behind that sort of the facade and like the image, the Wikipedia entry that we all know about whoever. And I guess it might be in a way easier to do that with some of the lesser known figures that are in the book, because people aren't maybe familiar with them as much.
Like, for example, like who?
Well, I mean, I don't think a lot of, Stephanie, of course, knows who Jim J. Bullock is.
Right, but a lot of people might not.
A lot of people don't remember that sitcom, and a lot of people don't know Jim, who is wonderful and I love. So I love kind of bringing some of these to me, they're icons. To like kind of giving them a perch to tell a very bigger story about this sort of transformational crash that's happening in this book. You know, this book covers sort of the earlier part of it. I think at Danceteria got later, but also covered some of the early, whatever. We splash around. We splash around the 80s. But I love, so the research is really, and my research is, you know, anything and everything I can read about whatever I'm writing about, obviously, but also different kinds of media. And, you know, it started with that first, me just watching that documentary about Keith Haring. I love visual media about these, you know, if I'm writing about an actor, I want to watch like all of their movies, you know, I go complete obsessive, you know me. So I just like dive in, I mean, hardcore. I mean, I had a 48 hours episode that focused on Natalie Wood that I think I've watched it like 7 times. It's just like, yeah. So the research really is to a very specific end. And the research itself kind of ends when I feel like I have that synergy moment. And it's, you know, it differs from story to story.
Well, yeah, I was going to say, does that synergistic moment, does that ever surprise you? Like,
yeah,
oh, I guess we're done here, or do you ever go out thinking you're going to do something and then sort of surprise yourself by doing something else?
Yeah, I think so. It's like sometimes you feel like you're like, oh, and it's sort of me being guilty of the thing that I don't want the reader to do, which is like, oh, well, I know this person and this is the story I'm going to tell about them. But then you start the research and you're like, oh, wait, you know, something else is happening here. And I think the aggregation of all the different pieces of research really helps find that way in, you know? And it's like, yeah.
I would imagine that there, and this is actually speaking as a social worker, I would imagine that there is something very precious about not wanting to fall into the pit of despair around an epidemic as tragic and nuanced and long lasting as the AIDS epidemic, where you actually feel do you feel a responsibility to speak of the humanity of that time in a way that maybe has not been done, or we sort of need to do forever? Absolutely.
And I think finding the humanity behind these figures is part of that, because it kind of brings them down to earth, because AIDS just democratized sort of everyone, and it just, you know, you're a celebrity, you know, you can't pay your way out of this. Right. You can't Oscar your way out of this. You know, it's like, everyone was at risk, and giving them that lens, I think it's sort of a different, not that this has never been done, but I just think it's a different sort of angle. Like we were saying, it's just a different bank to view the story from.
Do you feel that just gives me the chills, first of all, but I also want to ask if you feel sort of a responsibility to tell these stories in fear that they may be forgotten?
Absolutely. And I think that is much more in this book than it is at Danceteria, just because a lot of, you know, some of these characters maybe that if people don't know, you know, there's always one story in the book that is real people, regular people, normal people, sort of I call it like the sort of man on the street view. It's another bank of what we've been seeing kind of from this sort of vaulted angle, from the celebrity angle, which you find out is actually very kind of like not even, you know, it's just as real as anything in a way. But in those real stories, you know, in this book in particular, I'm telling some stories about people who actually, you know, passed away of AIDS that I know, and kind of have sort of written them into the book in a way. But so I think, you know, as we've discussed, the story of AIDS and especially those early days of AIDS, it's sort of slipping away, and just people don't, you know, I talk to like the younger crowd, and it's like they don't know necessarily some stuff. So I think this, if anything, I'd like this to kind of lead to, let me pick up another book and read about this, or but
do I hear you saying you're becoming an elder?
I think I am. Yes.
You look fantastic for that term.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm like a kind of dad at a 50s barbecue right now.
I'd love like a corn on the cob right now, or like I don't know, like a hamburger. I'd love Aaron hamburger.
Yeah, Aaron hamburger. I love an Aaron hamburger.
I love an Aaron hamburger. So someone asked a question here. How do you choose the lives which you reflect on for this collection?
Oh, wow. That's a good question. It really just sort of comes to me. I don't know. I think I saw Jim J. Bullock on like something, and I was like, oh my God, that show. And then it was just, and then I like did a little research and I found out about this episode that they taped during, that happens later in the story than what I read. I just, these sparks, I just get these little ideas. And then sometimes, and we discussed this at one of our previous sessions, was, sometimes you're writing about a certain person and then this sort of side character pops in and kind of begs to be written about themselves in a way that you weren't expecting. So, I always love that. And when it happens, actually, if we talk about the title of the book, that's sort of what happened with the title character.
Well, let's do. I'd like to, first of all, I just want to say that it's been how many years since Danceteria?
5?
Danceteria? Did I say it right?
Danceteria?
Cafeteria? Danceteria?
You got it.
I'm so sorry. So Better Davis is kind of like a sequel or a second act in some way, but I'd love for you to discuss the difference between the two in terms of your process, in terms of, and certainly in terms of what happened.
Yeah. So.
Yeah.
This November will be 5 years since at Danceteria. Yeah. So, and it's funny, I actually started writing Better Davis the August before At Danceteria came out, like a couple of months before it came out. Like it was already sort of done. And I was like,
wow.
But yeah, so what I wanted to say about, I always had more stories that I wanted to tell in this vein. I kind of got wrapped up a little bit with At Danceteria, like it needed to be finished and I had a deadline or whatever. Like there might have been a couple more stories that got into that book, but I'm kind of glad they didn't now. But we wanted to do this second volume, and at first I really thought I didn't have enough material to kind of write a whole other book. And I was just like, maybe I'll just publish them, piecemeal here and there, and we'll just be done with it. But I started writing this book, and the story ideas that I came up with, they all started sort of linking together oddly. And I wrote this collection in a very different way than I wrote At Danceteria. I never thought At Danceteria was going to be a book. I was writing those stories totally individually, publishing them here and there. And I just never thought about it. And Raymond Luxak, who's my publisher, wonderful man out of Minneapolis, he was the one that was publishing these stories in his journal. And he said, let's do a whole book of these. So, you need to write 3 or 4 more or whatever, and let's do a book. So he deserves a lot of the credit for both of these books, and actually pushed me to kind of make this happen. And I'm so glad he did, because in a long-winded way, what I'm trying to say is that when the writing of this book, something changed. Something is a little bit different about this book, because I knew it was going to be a book, and there's there's more of a, the first 3 stories actually all link together very actually the first 4, there's something from each story that bleeds into the next one in some way. Which happened very sort of organically. And I think that, and not by design in a way, in some, I felt like I kept writing about actors forgetting lines, and I wasn't even meaning to. And I was like, I think that's sort of a larger symbol of something happening. Things are decomposing, something is wrong,
right.
And yeah, so I don't know if that answered the question, but.
That's a great answer. I love that theme of the actors forgetting their lines. Is it like they don't even know what's going on, but it's happening? Okay.
Yeah.
I do want to ask you. I just would like you to. I just love the way you read dialogue. So I would love you to read
anything for you.
Could you do a little bit of? Oh gosh, what should we do? Could we do a little bit of Elizabeth?
Yeah, sure. Where do you have a specific part?
How
about when they get to the club?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So this is, if you could just set the scene a little bit.
So Elizabeth Taylor and Maureen Stapleton are in the play The Little Foxes, Lillian Hellman's amazing play. And they are sort of they're doing like an out of town tryout period in DC before it goes to Broadway. And they have just performed, and now the two of them are going out on the town to a drag bar for some drinks. And Maureen is already drunk.
Had it be known. Had it be known.
Right. So this is literally, and before this scene, well, something happens before this, but read it and find out. This is sort of halfway through the story. One of the stagehands was holding a tall glass of vodka that he handed to Maureen the second the cast left the stage after the curtain call. Elizabeth had seen her get those drinks night after night at the end of each show, gulping them down like she was dying of thirst. One of the stagehands told me about some place called Pier 9. It's a gay club with drag shows. Come with me? Asked Maureen. I love gay bars. I just ditched the Reagans. Let's go, Elizabeth said. I need a drink. Well, you're just in luck because we're going where drinks were invented, Maureen said, downing the rest of her vodka. Elizabeth and Maureen got into a cab and headed to Southwest DC. You saved me today on that stage. That line I dropped, I blanked out. It was like I had no past. I had no present. There was nothing but that one moment, and the moment was terrifying. You saved yourself. You're new to the stage. It happens to everyone at some point. Maureen took Elizabeth's hand. You're really good in this play, Liz. I mean that, truly. Isn't it funny that I'm the one playing the old money character? Old, frumpy Irish Catholic Maureen. I've done well playing Jews, Italians, and Irish, dusty old Southern money. That's something new. You drink too much, Liz said. Why? Why not? Said Maureen. You marry too much. Why? She asked. Touché. I was so drunk one time I almost drank a candle. Maureen laughed to herself and looked out the window of the cab. My father fondled me once in a movie theater. That probably has a little something to do with it. Why I drink. But the real answer is simple. I love being drunk. I'd give it all up if I could just, oh wait, hold on. Let me just go, I'm gonna move on. The cab drops them off at the club, and the guy taking the ticket says, "Nice Liz Taylor drag, honey. Very believable," said the man. "See, I told you," Maureen said to Elizabeth. "Come on, let's go get some drinks."
That's great. That's so great. Thank you. I just love that. I mean, there's a little bit of taste of the sort of interplay between these people. They're both kind of experiencing this time in different ways. And I love the line, there was nothing but that one moment, and that moment was terrifying. It's like I don't know, and that just comes up in a conversation. It's a beautiful way of portraying the way in which people are recognizing what's happening without knowing that that's what's happening, which is the beauty of literature, I suppose.
Yes, so exactly. There is like there's terrifying moments where they're terrified sort of about something is just anxious about a lot of the stories, and I think that comes up a lot in the Natalie Wood story, which is called Brainstorm, which there's the tension is just ratcheting up throughout the story. But it's also the growing tension of the virus that's sort of coming, and how the way it enters that story is just very brief, but it's sort of like, oh yeah, it's, the fact that story is set specifically in 1981, I think is also really important in a way, because it's November 1981, so AIDS has been around for 4 months. It's just very new.
Oh, how interesting.
Very terrifying, frightening.
Do you feel like you learn things from these characters as you write them?
Yeah, for sure.
There's almost like so sorry, and I interrupted. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, it's almost like I think, and I think you might agree with me, I think I might have learned the most from a fictional character in the book, which is Terrence. I think I learned I think I learned a lot from him. I feel like
You guys get your hands on this book so that you can get to know Terrence. He is a real dream.
Yeah. So yeah, I think I want to be more like Terrence, I think.
Yeah.
But yeah, he's actually the title character of the book. His alter ego drag persona is Better Davis.
Could you talk about the title? Can you talk a little bit about
yeah,
I mean, it's just a great title.
Thank you. It was, so this is another last minute title change. The original title of the book was Very Special Episode, which is the first book, story that I read tonight. But right when we were going to whatever, print, contract, whatever, I don't remember what stage it was, but I found out that there had been another book with that title that came out just 2 years ago. It was a poetry collection called Very Special Episode. I'm like, okay, well, that's not happening. So I just picked Better Davis. That was another title in the book. And, you know, the character of Better Davis and that story in particular just really kind of unifies a lot of themes, I think, in the book.
So Better Davis is just, I just want to Better Davis is the drag name of Terrence. Terrence's drag name is Better Davis, which is fucking fantastic.
Yeah, it just came to me like one day. And I think we talked about it, but like I was convinced that someone had already come up with that. But
I mean, I think you're a genius, but like I'm surprised that someone had. It's so good.
Sometimes all it takes is a letter. Yeah. So anyway, the character is very. I think the fact that the book is called Better Davis really works for what he sort of essentializes about many themes in the book, that character and that story. So I think ultimately it was a good move. Everything happened. Everything worked out.
Are there characters in this? Yeah. Are there characters that you relate to surprisingly that you thought you maybe you wouldn't have, but over time you do in some way, even though maybe you're not as, there's not like overt similarities, but.
Yeah, I think actually maybe Maureen Stapleton in that story. I really like, I read her memoir, which, is very much in her voice and has her language. And like, this is one of the characters I was talking about that kind of was just going to be a side character, but took on sort of more importance to me and in the story. But when I was reading her memoir, she had so much, she had such a great, like an amazing like life. And it was just, it was just jam packed. And she like knew everyone. Like Marlon Brando was like a nobody and sleeping on their couch, like trying to get acting jobs. Like, it's just like, it was just, she just knew, like she had all this amazing history. And I just loved like just delving into her language that she would use. It was just so specific. And it's really fun to try to write the dialogue and try to really capture how they would talk. And, I really, it's hard to kind of, it's very difficult to write 80s dialogue, I think, just because you can't, you can't throw in like anachronisms, and it just has to be very, so watching movies from the time period that I'm writing in is also really helpful, just for kind of hearing the language of the times and like the palette of the times too, like the colors, the music, like the whole background that you have to evoke but not overpower with. It's like a very delicate balance.
So talk 80s vibe. Like what did you, what's your if you were to walk into a room that was the 80s, like what would it be like for you now that you're so intimate with it?
Well, I'm just thinking of this moment actually from By Halston, which is the first story in At Danceteria. And when Liza comes in, there's this moment where I'm describing the sound of the clank that her Bakelite bracelets make, and just 2 Bakelite bracelets, like to me that sort of like was the perfect, and that story takes place in 1983, and I was just like, yes. And I was like, they're cream colored, like that, like, so just that to me was 80s, like the clank, that clank, because that when Bakelite touches other Bakelite, it makes a it makes a clank.
Mhm.
And it was just like that clank on her wrist of those two bracelets. Like, so just, I get that, like, you know, I want to get that specific sometimes. So I felt like even just that moment is 80s.
I love it.
And then of course having music weaved in is just a great way to kind of, you know, give that. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's also sort of like, not every, like if a song came out in 1980, like not every song that's playing in the background is a song that's like the top hit of like that year. You know, like we're listening to songs that are a couple, we just regularly are listening to songs that like are, you know, 3 to 4 to 5, like whatever years old. So playing with that soundtrack is fun, but also can be hard too. But I think that can evoke the 80s as well.
Absolutely, in some kind of very, very visceral way that you can't get like shake off of you in some way.
Yeah, like the scene all of a sudden needs that song. It just like, there you go.
Well, I would say, I'm just going to hint to you and anyone watching that I would love to see these on screen. I would love to see these stories on screen. They are begging to be filmed.
Yeah, they really are.
Don't you think?
I agree, 100%.
Can I play someone?
Yes. Oh my God, yes. Just tell me who you want to play.
I don't know. I have to think about it. I mean, I'd love to play Elizabeth Taylor.
Oh, wouldn't that be amazing?
Yeah, but maybe not. Maybe my hair's too thin. I don't know.
Oh God.
I do want to say, I want to just take a moment to say that I just, if anyone has any questions and they're having a hard time writing the questions in the YouTube format, you can send your questions to events@malaprops.com. That's events@MALAPROPS.com. And I'd love to, we only have 5 minutes left though.
Yeah.
So I'd love to open this up to some questions from people.
Or if Stephanie has a question.
Or if Stephanie has a question, or anyone, if Patricia wants to come back, any questions?
I'll just take a cue because you invited me earlier to pop back on. And since we do only have 5 minutes left, I actually just want to start by saying how much I've enjoyed your conversation this evening. Not just because I've enjoyed hearing you talk about the book, and Emily, you've asked such wonderful questions, and Phil, you really are a wonderful reader. And thank you for reading the story that we talked about, which did make me blush.
Awesome.
Right?
Yeah, thank you.
Mission accomplished.
Mission accomplished.
But also just to say, like, one of my favorite things, and I always hesitate to say this because I know anybody who actually watches multiple events with us has probably heard me say this 100 times, but I'm saying it to you, right? Mm-hmm. That I just love it together to talk about books, and those people already know and love each other. And that is so obvious in what's happening during the conversation. And it is with the both of you. And I just appreciate that. And it's just been a real joy. It's just been a real joy on that level.
Same.
I hope so. I mean, if it's not real, then y'all are the best actors. You know, some of the best actors
we were in a play once together.
we were. We've acted together.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm having trouble hearing now, so I feel like we've got a little lag.
Okay.
Patricia, can you hear? Is everything okay?
I hear everyone, she said.
So I think
all seems well
me.
To me. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm hearing everybody. Sounds good.
Okay. I think it's just me. So I wanted to actually go ahead and invite y'all to do some book recommendations. We talked about that a little bit earlier. And so I'm going to step back again for a couple of minutes since my internet seems to be acting a little wiggy, and invite you to recommend, in addition to Better Davis and Other Stories and Danceteria, which I got wrong because of Spanish as well earlier. Danceteria. Okay. And so in addition to your books, Phil, if you have any recommendations for folks who are watching.
I do actually. I just finished the most amazing book. It's called The Power of the Dog by Thomas Savage. It's actually coming out as a movie this year, maybe this month or something. And it was fantastic. It's sort of like a 1920s, it's set in a Western kind of vibe, but it's this sort of crazy story. I'm shocked that I've never read it. It's from I think the late 60s. It's fantastic. I can't wait to see what they do with the movie of this, because I think it's just going to be, it's like the very character psychological too, base, which I really appreciate. And it really just goes there. And I'm just surprised that for a 1967 book where they go here, it's very interesting. So that's one of my recent reads. Emily, do you have anything?
I am reading, right now, currently reading Codebreaker for my book club, which I joined with my mom, which is fantastic. And I'm enjoying that. But the last book I just devoured, which totally took me by surprise, was The Book of Longings by Sue Monk Kidd, who wrote Secret Life of Bees.
Mm-hmm.
I've never read anything else of hers, but it's a retelling of the Old Testament through a fictional portrayal of the wife of a wife of Jesus. And it's a beautiful,
wow.
Kind of mythical, and the language is really sort of specific. I don't know, I just loved it. I love that book. I just kind of devoured. So
wow.
I would say that, yeah.
That sounds amazing.
And then as a social worker, I'm an opioid researcher. So all of my other books are about the opioid epidemic, which I wouldn't necessarily recommend, but
unless you want to learn
unless
about
you unless you want to learn about it. So I won't go there.
Yeah.
So I'm just loving everything, all the suggestions we got tonight.
Totally. I'll have to check that one out too.
Yeah. Yes.
Nightmare Alley is another book I read recently. That was good. William Lindsay Gresham. Another older book from the 30s, I think. I decided that I wanted to read the books of all these movies that are coming out first. I always do that too with plays. I like to read the play before I see it on stage. Sometimes I really like to know what's going to happen.
You control freak.
Yeah, totally. And then
I applaud that.
Yeah. Stephanie, and do you have anything that you would recommend?
I thank you for asking. I am going to go ahead and put in a plug for Secret Lives of Church Ladies by Disha Filia. It's brilliantly and beautifully written, also makes me blush, but she's, and it is what it sounds like, but just with an incredible depth, and it's just a wonderful collection. Yeah.
Are they linked, or is it a total
they're not linked directly, but they are linked thematically for sure. And so they do feel, everything feels very well connected in the collection. And she's, and we did an event with her, and she, even mentioned the fact that one of the things she was wondering about, and I identified as growing up Baptist and having my own church lady issues, right? And so, one of the things that she was thinking about is what do these women get up to in the bedroom, for instance, right? But she's working with that with such humanity and such depth, and also, she's a Black writer talking about Black church women, and you don't have to be Black to read and enjoy the book, right? But on that level, having that sense of connection also just adds another layer that I particularly appreciated as a Black reader, because that's something that you don't always find, right?
Right.
My specific connection. Yeah.
One of my main focuses in my undergrad for my Lit major was African American literature. I mean, and it was such amazing classes that I took that were based around just incredible, like Toni Morrison and Charles Johnson. It was just I had never encountered these writers before, and it just completely blew my mind.
And that's the shame of it, right? Like
Yeah,
there's this sort of idea of what literature is. And there's folks who aren't on that list until you get to college, if you're, lucky, or maybe grad school sometimes, right?
Yeah.
Which is just, I mean, white supremacy and the patriarchy are like a whole other event, right?
But discovering, having a very early foundation that was made up of those writers really, really helped me. I was actually just thinking about Nella Larson, who wrote Passing. And that's another movie that's coming out actually. So I dug out my old copy of Passing from college. And I think that's my next book I want to read, because I want to
So that's another plug for Patricia for the links, if Patricia has time, is Passing by Nella Larson, which was recently reissued, so you can pick up a new paperback of that as well.
Anybody who really liked The Vanishing Half by Britt Bennett would love.
Great one.
Passing is sort of the grandmother of that book. I mean,
exactly right.
Oh, great.
Passing is like is a progenitor.
Absolutely.
Kind of work for sure. And everybody needs to read some Zora Neale Hurston. We could go on for. Thank you for giving me that space during your event, Phil.
Absolutely.
Thank you for hosting us and having us. It's been
my
wonderful.
It's been great. I really appreciate I just specifically the balance in the stories. First of all, I'm a slow reader, so I appreciate short stories. So there's that. And then in that, whenever anyone in that small space can do things like balance humor and pathos and raunch, right? And just like all that real stuff that in real life can hit you from one beat to the next. And then when you can do that on the page,
I feel like you've just perfectly described Phil Walker as a human being.
What? Well, excellent. Then
manages all of those things at the same time. Well, it's been great to meet you, Phil and Emily, and to spend some time with you, hearing you talk this evening.
Thank you so
I'll
much.
just recommend again that folks pick up Better Davis and Other Stories from Malaprops or your local indie. And we appreciate you so much. Thank you. Yes, excellent product placement again. Good night, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.